But when we're talking about play, the question that I always have is like, what can we do next? How can we make this better? And it turns out the idea of play is actually something that's researched very seriously. And a lot of times when we look at making advancements in our buildings and in our architecture, we look at artists because a lot of the requirements that buildings have are not requirements in the same way for artistic projects. They don't have the same building codes necessarily, things like that. This is a sculpture by Picasso on opening day in Chicago. And certainly when he put a sloping piece of steel like this at ground level, he knew that interaction was going to be happening. These skateboarders actually made a whole video about skateboarding on Pablo Picasso statues. There are certainly other examples. This is in France, where this is a practice playground element for climbing, which is a wild one. But then there's also folks like this. This is Naguchi, and a lot of people know him for his sculpture and for his tables, like this Naguchi table. But he also did a lot of work with play spaces. And for instance, the carving of this landscape behind him, the way that he would make these kind of ambiguous playground elements, some of which are more obvious than others in terms of how you interact with them. And then other ones that really blur the line between, is this a landscape? Is this a sculpture? Like, what is this? Either way, he's setting up the conditions for people to then respond to. And so some examples of this idea of a fixed object that is set up for interaction. Regardless of golf, what you think about it, golf courses are things that evolve significantly over time. Technology changes, the landscape itself grows, evolves and changes, and things deteriorate. And so things that were set up in one way might end up being in a completely different era as trees are added or trees are removed, as technology changes. And so there often is significant capital expenditure that actually has to go into renovating golf courses. And anybody who runs and owns a facility will know that as well, that these things don't just live as they are. They actually require this sort of evolution over time. And we're going to talk about climbing specifically in just a minute. Another example of this would be racetracks, where the evolution of racetracks changes significantly in a lot of cases, where the cars change, the technology changes, the style of racing changes. What do people actually prefer in a given era? And furthermore, another example of these sort of big open spaces that actually have a lot of organization would be an airfield or an airport, where you can immediately see all of these runways and all of these approach angles that are pretty clearly defined based on what's actually going to be happening. And some of them are drawn more specifically onto the actual tarmac, and then others end up being a little bit more calibrated based on, how sharp can a turn be relative to the speed of a plane as it's being moved. And so there's a calibration that is not necessarily documented in the final object. And, when we look at skateboarding again, this is this idea of finding an object and then making it into something that you're interacting with. So, finding objects, this is a fixed handrail that is then being used in, a way that probably wasn't intended. These skate parks that are more curated certainly are a little bit more, geared for that, and they're set up to be that. And there are projects like the Street Dome in Denmark where they're combining architecture and skateboarding in a way that I think is more meaningful. And part of the reason for that is because they actually brought in Rune Glifberg, this is from anybody who remembers Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. He actually consults on skateboarding projects. And so just like there are people who I work with to bring in as experts, whether it's for skate parks, whether it's for other opinions on climbing, whatever the case is, it takes a collaboration to make facilities that are truly unique. And certainly anybody who says that they're an expert in everything is probably somebody, that I would run away from. And that's not at all what I'm saying, because this is a team sport to get things to be where we want them to be.